Well, Beneath Still Waters is the story of a town that was drowned under a lake by a dam because it was evil. And then 40 years later, the evil is rising again. Beneath Still Waters, the idea of making this novel, this horror novel, into a movie was actually came from Peter Block of Lionsgate. And he had been involved in some of the other Fantastic Factory movies, and he mentioned that he had read a book that he thought might be very interesting about a evil town that had been, buried underwater, and as it happens, I had the galleys to that book because years ago, Matt Costello, the author, had actually sent me the book before it was published with the idea that maybe it would make a good movie. Now, years later, Peter Block suggested this, and I spoke to the people at Filmex International, Antonia Nava, and I said, listen, we should just go ahead and look at this again and see if we like it. So I revisited the book, and we decided, yes, this would make a good movie, a difficult movie, because it had some problems that we had never faced before from the Fantastic Factory. And that was the idea of doing quite a bit of storytelling underwater and having to have a town underwater, kind of like a haunted town underwater. So this seemed quite complicated for us, besides the fact that it being a Matt Costello horror novel, not only was the evil coming from below, but everybody above starts turning into monsters, and so there's a lot of special effects to be dealt with. The movie, as we developed the script, I worked with Mike Hostinch and Angel Sala here in Barcelona in writing the script, but Matt Costello was involved throughout the whole process. In fact, he did a first kind of treatment of his book, which of course it changed quite a bit, but to keep him involved, I thought it was important to let him kind of give an opinion of how he would see a movie version, because much has to be taken out and adapted to take a full novel and make it a 90-minute movie. But I really wanted, by the end, for Matt Costello to feel like that was that he could support the version that we did of his book. Michael McKell is an actor that I met in London when we did the London casting for Beneath Still Waters, and we were looking for an actor who was, the part is a character who's in his late 30s, perhaps, and has already had a failed marriage, who has a past. He feels guilty for his son having drowned, and he is a diver, a professional diver, photojournalist. So he's kind of an athletic type of man, an adventurer, and he's a hard drinker, and he has a hard time hanging on to relationships, but he's also has to have a lot of heart. He really has a tragedy in his past. And when we were looking at the different actors that were being proposed in London, Michael McKell was a theater actor. He had done movies and television, but mostly he plays bad guys. He plays these kind of hoodlums in British dramas. And it was kind of a twist for him to play a good guy, to play the romantic lead. And I was, he wanted to do it, and we were a little unsure, but we did a couple scenes with him, and I really liked how seriously and how deeply he took the part. And for these types of horror movies, this is very important because sometimes it's difficult for an actor to take it very seriously because you're playing a part, you're in a movie where all kinds of demons and monsters and really fantastic things happen, and for many actors this makes them feel less convinced. But I thought Michael had a great look, and he had a very hard look of a man who's been around, who's lived, but he had a great, a real tender center to him. I knew Raquel Meroño for many years, ever since we shot Dagon, that Stuart Gordon directed, and Raquel played the female lead in that. And so I had known her and become friends with her, and I would see her over the years, and I kept saying, I'm gonna have a part for you. I want to direct a movie with you, and she'd say, well, what part is it now? And of course, one movie would come and another would come, and there wasn't quite the appropriate role for her. And when Beneath Still Waters came up, I looked at the role and I thought, if this role, she's actually a young single mother who's the romantic interest. And I think it's a very interesting role because the character is also someone who's very flawed. She's someone who had a bad upbringing without her father. Her father was the mayor of the town and had a bad reputation, and her mother took her to London, and her mother died when she was young. So she's a single mother who feels very insecure, but who's very ambitious and has a winning personality. This part I thought was very interesting, and when I sent the script to Raquel, and I said, listen, you don't have to try out for the part, but if you like it, it's yours. And fortunately, she did. Jose Maria Poe was an actor that the casting director, Pep Armengol, suggested to me. He presented him to me. And Pep is a casting director that I've worked with on a number of films now, and I really appreciate working with him because I trust very much his opinions on actors. Many casting directors just bring in actors to read, and Pep is different. Pep comes up with interesting ideas for actors, and then will take you to see their work. And he's very involved in the world of theater, so this made it, it makes it so that when I'm working with him, we go to the theater quite a bit, just to see an actor. And with Poe, he was the one who came up with the idea of using him, and Poe is, of course, a very respectable and accomplished Catalan actor. And we were very fortunate that Poe was interested in doing the part of the tortured, haunted, drunken supervisor of the dam. Well, this also was something that Pep suggested. He said, well, you know, this Olympic champion swimmer, David Mecca, is, you know, he's interested in acting, like many athletes, many professional sportsmen. When they get past their prime, not that David's not past his prime, but it's very typical for them to also be interested in acting, in entertainment. And David had been trying to, he had been doing some things on TV, and so Pep called him in for a meeting, and I talked with him, and I thought, wow, I really like the quality that he has. He's, in a movie with casting, I prefer having actors who are very distinct from one another, that the character types of the actors are very different. I like to have a fat one, an ugly one, a handsome one, a thin one. You want different types. And David has this sense of freshness and brightness and almost a very honest kind of look and nature. And so I thought it would be very interesting to use him in a part where he's a diver, a police diver, who of course finds some terrible things under the water, but that later he actually turns into a horrible zombie. So he becomes this crazed madman. And I thought that would be a good contrast for someone like David Mecca, who in Spain has a very clear identity. The locations for Benisto Waters were very difficult to find because it all takes place at a dam, a pantano, a reservoir, a dam and a reservoir. Well, this limits you right away. And we're trying to be economical. We can't shoot our movie in 5 different cities and find each location in another city. We want to shoot it all in one city. And so we thought to shoot in Madrid. And outside of Madrid, there's a few different dams. And we chose one. I think that it was tough because you're creating a world that doesn't really exist. For example, to create our dam, we used 2 dams. And we had, from one angle we'd see one, and from another angle we'd see the other. On camera you don't recognize this, but for the storytelling, it's difficult to use to use a real place just as it exists because it's not clear enough what it is. So we did have to go outside of Madrid for the dam, and we found most of our locations all around Madrid. For underwater, of course, we had to shoot in big swimming pools, and as well as make miniatures for the town. It was quite a very complicated shoot. Yeah, Johnny Yebra is the director of photography. I believe this is his first feature film. He's done TV movies and does a lot of spots, music videos. We shot this movie in high definition, which was also a very scary thing to do because today, even though we see very big Hollywood movies shot in high def, for example, the Star Wars movies now, for not high-budget Hollywood movies, it's kind of a scary proposition because the technology is still young, it's still emerging, and there's a sense that it's not going to look like a real movie. But I thought that for the Fantastic Factory, it was very important to move in this direction and find out how this would work. And of course, none of the other directors who directed in the Fantastic Factory wanted to do it. So I thought, well, I'll try it. You know, I'll give it, I will take a chance. But I was pretty confident that this would work. And we did a lot of research and got the best equipment. With Johnny, he had a lot of experience on high def. So one of the things I looked for in a DP was a DP who had experience using the high def equipment and really understood the capabilities and dangers of it. And this is one of the things Johnny brought to the table. But of course, he wasn't the only candidate. What really sold me on him was his enthusiasm for the project. He was so enthusiastic and so positive. And many of the DPs that we talked to, they would look at the script, look at our schedule, and they would say, you know, this is very difficult. I don't know if we can do all this. And so you would get this sense of caution, serious caution. Whereas with Johnny, he just said, oh, this will be great. Oh, he always had an idea of how to solve the problems. And his reel looked very good. He had very good ideas aesthetically. And what really sold me was that after we had our first meeting, he went and put together a compilation of movies scenes with the look he wanted for the movie, and came back and showed it to me. And I thought, wow, this guy really has done his homework. He really is positive, and that's going to be very necessary for this production, because many people think that we can't do it. There's too much to do in the time period. There's too many effects. There's too many moves. But Johnny was very positive, and I turned out to be correct. Johnny had a great deal to do with our being able to shoot the whole movie within the time period allotted. It had a lot to do with him just getting out there, and no matter what the problem was, he had a solution. He was always very, very, very positive. And I always remember him whenever there'd be a problem, and I'd say, well, we'll just have to do it this way, whether it's possible or not. And he'd think a minute, and he'd say, perfecto. I'd say, okay, perfect. The special effects for Beneath Still Waters were complicated by the fact of the lack of experience for many of them that we had. What I like to do is to get an effects supervisor first, who can find the right people to do the effects. This is something that isn't very typical for movies of this size, and it's not typical at all for movies in Spain or in Europe. But even back in LA and the United States, when I do these types of movies, most movies like this are not, the effects are not handled this way. It's something that I prefer to do, because my theory is that you can get better effects if you divide up the work for specific interests of different shops. Many people think that you should just take what money you have and give it all to one company, because then they can use it better. But I don't think so. I think that there's some effects that are very complicated, and you need a kind of a high level of experience to do those. Well, those very experienced companies are going to charge you a lot more, because they have the experience, and they have a big overhead. But there's some effects that are much simpler, and you can get people who have much less experience, and they will dedicate more of their passion to it. So this is why I like to divide it up. The effects for this movie are divided into the makeup effects, makeup and mechanical effects, the optical effects, and the miniature effects. So it's not just one or the other. Fortunately, I was able to have Mariano Lepsky on as my visual effects supervisor, as well as post-production supervisor, as well as second unit director. So he's somebody that I really trust, and he handled all the effects that has to do with digitals, with composites, with miniatures. Then I had Oscar Aparicio to be the effects supervisor for the makeup effects, and that was a very difficult job. So he got 3 effects companies to do the makeup effects, and we divided up the work amongst them. So I think the effect that everybody remembers the most is probably there's a creature in the movie that kills Jose Maria Pou, and this effect, all these effects were done in Madrid, and this effect particularly was done by Pedro de Diego, who was a young effects artist that I met when I was doing when we were doing Beyond Reanimator, and I think he's very terrific. He has a very finished quality to what he does, and I think that Oscar is a fantastic effects supervisor for the makeup effects, and he made sure we got everything we needed, and he had to suffer a lot because effects artists are like actors. They're less like technicians, and they're more like actors. So you have to treat them with a lot of care. And Oscar is very good at that, and he understands the effects, and he loves the effects. And he even built an effect for us. There's a little, I don't know, it's kind of like an alien flower that he built, and it was just an extra thing. And he brought it in, and so I said, well, shoot it. So I gave him a camera, and he shot it. And of course, we put it in the movie because it was so bizarre looking. I don't know if it makes any sense, but it looks cool. One of the, I would certainly say the most fun I had on the film was the one night when we shot the big party scene. This scene was a problem that I inherited from the book. I've certainly had many discussions with Matt Costello about the problems he gave me with this novel, because he put so many things in it. And I was trying to respect all his ideas in the book. And one of them is that when the evil starts coming out of the lake, the whole town gets infected. And they start acting crazy. And in the book, there's a big masquerade party. There's a big party in which the people start going a bit crazy. Well, we had to do this in the movie. In the script, we focus on the main characters, but we have to see that the town is also going crazy. So we made a party, and even though it doesn't take up a lot of screen time, it became a big deal because you have to get all these extras, 100 or more extras, and then you have to somehow get them to act, to represent different levels of madness. And so in this, we decided that we would have these different levels of people going crazy. And normally, I've done these types of scenes. When you try to show people being bad or the evil, it's always the same thing. It's always sex and violence. Sex, violence, cannibalism, animalism. I mean, you just take all the typical taboos that we have, and normally they're sexual. And then there's violence, hurting people. And then if it gets really bad, liking to be hurt. So all these things really fall under the category, I would say, of sexual perversity. But we don't, when you think of evil, visually, that's about what you get. You know, you imagine the Bosch painting of the Garden of Earthly Delights. You know, you just imagine visual perversity. So to do this scene, we got all these extras, and we just had them act in different ways. I said, first act drunk. Now some people can start kind of kissing each other, and the people who are uncomfortable start hitting each other. So fighting and kissing. And then of course it got more and more perverse until it was violence and nudity and sexual behavior, and we threw in a goat and a chicken. But the thing that always amazes me is how you can take normal people, extras, normal people, and when you put the camera on and start this game, how crazy they will get. And for me, I was just laughing the whole night. I had such a good time because I just love to watch people play like that. And you'd be surprised, all these extras, many of them have worked in other movies and they know the job, but when they were leaving, they felt so good in the morning. This was all night long, and many of them thanked me. And I realized that people, the process of acting and be able to act out these crazy things, it makes people feel really good. It's like being a child again. There's something about acting out the taboos that make you feel invigorated and energetic. But this was a wonderful time. I just had a great time doing it. I think the most interesting part of shooting Beneath Still Waters for me was the problem of creating an underworld haunted town and haunted house. This was the part that I found to be the most, that I was less sure about, and it was the biggest challenge. Most everything else in the movie I had done before one way or another, but this idea of not just being out on the water, but being underwater, and having to plan out a town. Well, of course there's no town underwater, and in fact if you actually took a camera down to a town underwater, you would see nothing, because once you get a few meters under the water, you can't see anything. But since it's a movie, of course we have to. Then we have the extra problem that we're shooting in the winter, and the water's very cold. And even with a wetsuit, actors and cameramen cannot be in the water for very long. So it's very cold, and you have to create this world underwater. We built a complete model of the town. It filled the whole stage. A wonderful job. And then we had to shoot all our camera moves, camera angles and the camera moves of the town, of the dry town, with smoke in the air. Those scenes we then put on the monitor, and in the swimming pool we would put a green screen behind on the walls of the swimming pool and shoot the actors from the same angle so we could composite it. Then of course we had to put those together and add more particles in the water and stuff to give the idea that we're really underwater. Of course, when the actors touched anything, we had to have a real set. So we also had to go into a giant diving pool and create a set, build a set in the pool, fill it up with water, and actually shoot the actors moving around down in there. This to me was the most difficult and complicated part of the movie, and it was an area where we could have failed terribly. And that's one of the interesting things about this type of movie. When we're working on the type of budget that we work on, if we fail, we really don't have any recourse because we've used up the budget. And these movies are pre-sold. The buyers have already bought them. You can't tell them, oh, by the way, we made a mistake. Now you have to pay us more. So it's a very delicate situation. I made sure that we had enough scenes underwater, but that they were simple enough that I thought we could pull it off. I never expected we would have such a good look. I never expected that the miniatures would be so good. I never expected that the underwater stuff would look so great. And if I had known how good it was going to turn out, I would have added more scenes underwater and less scenes above the water, because I think the underwater stuff's fantastic. The movie, we're hoping to, I think we're going to have a release here in Spain shortly, and of course we always hope that it'll be successful. And around the world, the different buyers will probably see how it works in Spain, and then see what kind of strategy they want to use for the releases around the world.